Hello, hello, hello. Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Mark Borski. I'm CTO at Tremolo Security, co-author of Kubernetes, an Enterprise Guide, third edition. With my, should we go with illustrious, infamous, famous,
Um, PETA,
PETA?
and a pain in the whatever. It's depending on the day, right,
No
Mark? I
comments.
mean, it
Uh,
depends. I've been called much worse. So, especially playing
uh,
hockey, years of names you
yeah,
just don't ever really think of. But yeah, all good. I answered it all. Everybody,
yeah. So Scott Sorovich, my co-author. How about we go with that one?
that'll
Uh,
work.
and we already have our first Boris. I have no fear. Boris is here. Uh, here always to join us. Thanks, Boris. Um,
Always good.
so we're in the home stretch, man. We got two major topics, four chapters, probably about. I'm gonna go with 6 or 7 labs left, sessions on labs left before we.
Hmm.
You think we'll get all of this chapter today?
I think so. I mean, especially the base of it. Mark, I mean, Kiali, I love showing Kiali, right?
Yeah,
I'm a big fan of it just because people don't realize one of my favorite features, honestly, and we'll get into this with the topics, but is that observability piece
yep.
and the power of an open source free, you know, um, kind of tool that gets even better when you front it with some kind of an OIDC provider.
I
Probably.
know, right? That's a
I was gonna
great
when we get to Key
idea.
Alley, we'll call that out. Got to call out the discovery I found and the discovery you fixed. But it's a awesome tool. And it's really matured a lot.
Yeah, no, so
That's
no
true.
contractors today, Scott, especially since this is your chapter. So you're on call for this one. Um,
Yeah, this one's mine. Yeah, yeah,
we
yeah.
did this one we first did this one in the second edition, right?
We did.
We didn't do Istio in the first edition,
We
did
did
we?
not. Yeah, we didn't. Hey, we got Alan today.
Hey, hey. Hello, hello, hello,
Hey,
Alan. Thank
Alan.
you
Good
for
to see you
joining
again.
us.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, I think this is one we added in the second edition.
we did. We did. The
And
first edition, because of those Docker chapters, kind of took away
yeah,
from some meat that we could put in for Kubernetes.
and something I really love about this chapter is it starts to really show the move outside of just the API server, right? Like we're really moving into application land, and we'll talk a lot more about that in the next chapter. But I really love how it's like, okay, this is how you talk to the outside world, and this is how services talk to each other, and what those relationships look like. And it's the first time we really start to dive into the thing that all this stuff supports, right? Because look, infrastructure is fun. I love infrastructure, but at the end of the day, the infrastructure doesn't exist for itself, right? Like we're supporting something,
Yep, yep.
and this is really the first chapter where we dive into what we're supporting.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you're saying, I like the infrastructure part, Mark. So I was writing up something about this, looked up, and I saw a really nice reference to this where it says, and I actually wrote it down. So like you said, infrastructure is there for a reason. Well, like they say, think of Kubernetes as roads and intersections of a city, right? You've got the highway, like with
Yep.
the network. You can move around, you can go everywhere, but no traffic lights, no speed limits, no police. Okay, you got it all there. So now what do? You need something like,
Threatening me with a good time, are you?
yeah, I mean, with that, I have to admit, there's days I'd like
Massachusetts
that.
drivers.
I would like that. But yeah, so then we put Istio in as the traffic and controlling system, right? Managing the flow, safety,
Yep.
security, obviously in this case, but and visibility. So traffic lights and traffic cams, right? So nobody wants those, but lets us know what's out there. And I always like to bring up the first thing is I containerization always great, right? Microservice is awesome, but any complex app, if you've dealt with them, and I know you have, Mark, and I'm sure others have, we have a lot of them that might have 40 services. One of the worst phone calls you get is, "Hey, something's slow."
Yeah.
Okay, which one? I got to go from A to 1, 2, 3, 4, blah blah blah. Obviously things jump around, but to what the user sees. Now, in
Yep.
normal Kubernetes, you're not finding that. I'm sorry. Maybe with add-on tools, app you're going to add other things. Don't get me wrong, but and even then, might still be difficult.
Yeah.
And you got to see it. You need observability to get into this. We didn't have it in the early days, right? We didn't quite have this kind of tooling that we have today. And Istio's come a long way, right? I mean, apps used to have issues with it. I mean, going way back,
Yeah.
7 years ago, it was like, oh man, something's weird with the proxy. Um, that's changed a lot, right? And even stuff like ambient mesh, we'll talk about, might even, I'll bring this out on the fly, Mark, might bring in somebody from Solo. So
Okay,
let's have a
cool.
talk on that. Um, Came in a conversation yesterday that, with ambient, getting into it, mentioned this stuff, and they said, "Hey, do you have guests?" And I said, "We do."
Yeah, I got a few
So
people I think would be a good folks to have on topic for talking about service mesh. I think that'd be a great idea.
yeah, especially when you get into like Solo, right? Uh, we won't talking about it real quick to everybody, listening, following. They have Istio support, all right? I mean, you got an open source project out there. These guys, not just that, they do a ton of other things. Don't get me wrong. One of my favorite tools by them is K-Agent. Another one I want to show at some point on our extra excursions, but it has to do with AI, obviously, K-Agent in the name. But they do a lot with Istio. I mean, without a doubt.
Oh yeah, I mean that's
So,
the main backbone of their business, from what I understand.
especially where they started,
Yeah,
definitely. I mean, they've branched out a little, right? There's other tools, but it's still, I think that I would think they would say their bread and butter is still going to be Istio and Service Mesh.
yeah. I mean it's one of those things that like it was the hottest topic in the world, a few years ago, and yeah, I feel like people don't talk about it nearly as much, but it's still one of those crucial bits of technology that if you're gonna have a if you're gonna have any kind of complex environment, you need like I don't know how you do a lot of stuff without some kind of mesh like framework. Um,
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
And
it just yeah, Kubernetes gives you some tools to do it, but it just yeah. And maybe we should talk about like what is a service mesh. Let's start there.
yeah, I mean, that gets into, well, it's kind of interesting. Service mesh. Um, we know Kubernetes can discover services, right? But not quite to this level. I'm going to give you another example of what Service Mesh can do. It's not just one cluster, right? That's a key.
Right.
I mean, it is by default, but what do you do if you've got two clusters, three, four, whatever? You can extend your Service Mesh across them. So it lets you deal with that observability, that I'm going to say flow control, that security, right? I think when you were saying, Mark, earlier, you heard a lot about it because people loved MTLS.
Yeah.
People, and we'll talk about this, right? Mutual TLS. People just said, I got to encrypt my, you know, communication, and really, cool to do, kind of heavy, right? It's like a sledgehammer for a nail. You got a
Yeah.
big product here, and you're enabling one little thing, but it was the only thing out there, right? Now, Cilium's added encryption without having to do that. You've got IPsec stuff out there. Of course, you had network level before, but that's different. Um, and like I said, really heavy and complex just for encryption.
Yeah.
But
Well, and I think that's also why you have a difference in the different the different service meshes, right? Because Linkerd is super lightweight compared to Istio.
yeah, that's come a long way, right? Don't get me wrong. You're going back about what, five? I'm going to say about 5 years ago, right? Linkerd had a lot of deficiencies. I think it even lacked layer seven, at a time. So
I don't
yeah,
think
Reno.
yeah, we know our friend Marino, right? I does Linkerd even do layer 7 now? I don't
I'm pretty
think
sure it was
they
added.
do.
I mean, I'll outright admit, and Kelsey Hightower says this too, right? At times, you just can't know it all anymore.
Yeah,
I cannot keep up with everything. I focus on what I have, not have to, right? What pays my bills,
right,
stuff I like, and then when I have time, try to be well-rounded, and of course, try to stay married, and everything else, because this can just consume you. Um, I'm pretty sure it does. We got into a conversation with this internally once, but there's still, somebody were to ask me, tell me the differences. I'll be dead honest. I can't tell you right now. I'd have to go do some research. I
right.
just can't know them all. I do know when you get to a contributor standpoint, obviously Istio still has a lot more contributors from different organizations, which I like.
Yeah,
Right? You're not getting two, three. You're getting a lot. I mean, Istio contributors, Microsoft, Google, Red Hat, just down the line. Um, so, and like I said, ambient mesh. Love to get more into that. And we did. Anybody that's watching is thinking, hey, why didn't they do this? Well, ambient, when we started writing the book, remember, it takes about a year to write a book,
yeah.
approximately. It was still alpha.
Was it
And
even alpha when we first? Because
I
it
think it
wasn't really
was.
when we got to the end of the book.
It was also early alpha,
Yeah,
right? I mean, it was added, which means you could turn it on.
well,
Um,
yeah, and I think the we released the book like the week before KubeCon, I think, like a week or two before KubeCon, and I think Ambient Mesh went GA at the last KubeCon.
could be.
From what I remember, like it was about that time. So it wasn't GA yet when it launched. So that's definitely one that I think we talk about probably in the next edition.
Oh, no doubt, no doubt. Because I brought that up right when we were doing this. Originally, I'm like, yeah, do we just kind of roll the dice and say let's talk about it, knowing it'll be a big
Yeah.
big feature. But even on the CSP side, you'll see, go to Google, they don't offer it yet.
Oh, really?
Last I checked, a couple weeks ago. Well, they have their own other implementation of some Istio stuff, right? Integrating Traffic Director
Right.
and that. So they've gone that route. Not to say they won't offer it, right? But they haven't. Of course, AWS doesn't, just because they don't offer it.
Well,
Istio
they
in
don't do
general.
any Istio, do they?
Yeah, I was gonna say they don't even offer
Yeah,
Istio.
I don't
So
think they offer it. I mean, they tend to stay out of like once you get the. I mean, they have add-ons for EKS, but once you get the cluster up and running, they're pretty hands off unless you're talking about integrating with one of their, you know, extra services, right? Like, if you want to go talk to some AWS service, um, can do that, but you can't like they
and they
tend
do
to
offer a
use,
mesh. I even forget what it's even called, Mark. Right? But
yeah,
I honestly, this is where I hear a lot of people in the word solo. Right? They will use Istio out there, and they need support. Maybe, right? You might roll your own open
yeah,
source, but if you want to support, there were really two options. There were Solo, and I want to say it was Tetra.
yeah. Well, and
Um,
Solo's 100% open source now.
yeah,
Like
well, like I said, K
Solo's,
Agent they've released. Um,
well, the K agent, but at KubeCon last year, they open sourced their implementation of Istio.
so their
So
deployment of it, yeah.
now I haven't looked at it, but all of their stack got all open sourced at KubeCon last year.
See, it's a great, I to me, makes sense, right? It's a complex product, no doubt, no doubt. And when we talk about this in here, we got an hour, right, to talk about this. We got a chapter to talk about the main. Plus, we have a follow-up chapter
Yeah,
that we'll do next week, right? Which is some of the resources that we'll use more in depth. But it's a 3-day class. There is an Istio class out there. There's also a book, which is pretty good. Istio up and running, right? So
well,
anybody
and
out
we're
there?
not trying to give you the end all be all
Oh no.
of this. It's too complex. Like we couldn't do it justice even in 3 or 4 chapters.
No, no. Two, I think we cover it to a point where you can be dangerous, right?
Yeah, well,
That's
what
okay.
I really like about our implementation, the way we cover it, is this chapter focuses very much on the infrastructure of Istio, how Istio works, how you get it up and running, what it looks like from a cluster operator's perspective. Um, Next chapter and this is really indicative of uh, the way that we do everything in this book, right? Because we're coming at it from and I will tell you, yes,
I
I will be at KubeCon.
I
So, oh,
I cannot.
fantastic! Glad to hear that, Alan.
I cannot make it. I had plans this year, guys, but for work, I just got back from London. I'm going on vacation October 17th, so I'll be on my cruise. I come back for a week, and I think I'll be going to India for 2 weeks.
Ooh, you're gonna rack up some frequent flyer miles with that flight.
There's a long flight from Buffalo to New
Yeah.
York.
Oh yeah.
Um, I'm dreading the flight. Let's just be honest. I don't care if it's first class or, you know, whatever. It's a long flight.
It is a long flight.
Yeah.
I am thrilled to say that I will be returning to KubeCon. So I am really looking forward to being able to meet you, Alan. And of
Mark
course,
represent
anybody
us.
else out there, I will. I'm 90% sure we're going to be doing a book signing. Um, yeah, so come by, say hello, get a free book if you haven't bought it yet. If you have, bring your book and I'll sign it.
Yeah,
Uh,
I
but
really wish I was. I've missed 2 years now, Mark, right? So
and this one is so awesome for me because Atlanta is such a short flight from DC. Like,
yeah, I was thinking of it for me from Buffalo to 2.5 hours to 2:20.
yeah,
I'm
it's like
like,
I mean, I think technically my flight is like an hour and a half, but like 40 minutes of that is sitting on the ground.
yeah,
Um,
they pad those stats now just so they're not late, right?
yeah.
So
So I mean, I kind of I just I yeah, I wish it was like going to New York where I could hop on a train. That would make it even better. But yeah. So yes, I will be at KubeCon. But uh, so yeah. So next chapter we focus on the application side and what it means to like write services that leverage um, Istio and to make a service that's Istio aware and what that means. So it's I think it's a really well-rounded approach because if you're an infrastructure person, you know enough to get it up and running and what questions to ask. If you're an app developer looking to live in this world, um, it's enough to get it up and running and play around with it, and then you can dive into the particulars that you run a service in.
mhm.
That's a great way to approach it, I think.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, definitely. And like you said, why a service mesh is, well, we're going to go through all those, right? We can kind of address it at the end, but that release cadence, the ability to do canary, the ability to do just AB. Now, don't get me wrong, there are some ingress changes or API gateway, right, that make some of this ability out there as well. But the way I always look at it is that's great they're doing those, but the Istio adds more after that too, right? So
yeah,
when you play catch up, you can chip at things a little bit, but providing that the leader doesn't sit there too long, they're going to add new stuff too, right? I don't see service mesh ability going away anytime soon. Certain
no,
persons maybe being replaced, but not to that level. And I know a lot of people ask, why do I need a service mesh, or why would I need an API gateway product when I've got a service mesh? And they are just different animals, right? And Marcus falls more into a developer side. But I know, like in my view, something like a Kong gateway or any other product out there, it's not the same, right? That offers more logging ability, transformation ability, rules. It's different. So if it does come up as a question, I don't think either's a replacement. They still complement each other.
you know, I it's one of those things, and we talk about this in the next chapter. I'm a little surprised that you haven't seen more overlap because the functionality is very similar. From the simplest way I've seen it explained is your API gateway is for north-south traffic, right? Getting in and out of your clusters where your APIs are, and your mesh is for east-west. So once you're inside the cluster, communicating with each other. Um,
Sorry, I thought Boris's reply.
Huh?
I just saw Boris wrote about signing the book. You'll pay for shipping. I gotta be honest, when people ask me to sign, I'm always thinking, what the heck do I write? Although I gotta be honest, for people to come here, like a Boris, Allen, Kafka, I think I could think of
Yeah.
something because they're here enough.
But like
We'll have to talk about that.
yeah, well, but like with service mesh, I think another thing, and this is really important from the enterprise side, something to keep in mind is not just separation of technologies and overlap of what the technologies can do, but separation of duties. Who's
Mm,
responsible? Because usually the people who are in charge of service mesh are not the same people who are in charge of your API gateways.
absolutely, yeah, yeah.
You know, you've
The
got
API gateways are customers of yours as the
exactly.
owner. Yeah,
You know, or you're a customer of the gateway, right? Because not every workload is Kubernetes. So the
yeah,
people who run the API gateway, it kind of gets back to the conversation of, why is your load balancer different from your ingress? Why is your identity provider different from your cluster? Because the people inside of enterprise who own these things, who are responsible for these things, are different people. They have different leadership. They have different managers. They get judged on different things. Their paycheck is based on different metrics.
different
Their
priorities,
bonus.
which
Exactly.
is never helpful.
And so the thing to remember is that even though the technology might be very, very close, that Venn diagram might be, really close to two circles. Fact is, the people who own it are completely different,
Yeah,
especially in large enterprise.
I'm with you. About 5 years ago, I thought for sure Istio and others would kind of really chip away, but they didn't.
Yeah,
They just they now to their credit, it's not that they didn't change a lot. Going from the sidecar to ambient, not a small change,
no.
and a huge benefit, frankly, cost benefit, performance, you name it. And we can kind of talk a little bit about that, which we probably should do. Mark, let me get up to my screen here.
Yeah, why don't we start having some fun with
The reason people are here, right? So let me make sure I got the right screen. Should be two. And so hopefully, is that visible or should I put that on my laptop screen?
like that. That I can see that. Might want to make the font a little bit bigger.
My neighbors can already read it from Windows. Let's see here. Yeah, obviously it's hard for me to see on that one, Marcus. I've got it.
Are you on a laptop or are you on
I put this on my big monitor. Let me pull someone. I'm gonna
yeah.
change the shared.
I might
Um,
I'm gonna pull you off here. I might switch over to the 4.3, or the closer to 4.3 that you get on the laptop monitor is usually a lot easier for streaming on the eyes.
oh, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, let me just change that out. Let me minimize that. Okay, so with any luck, that should be showing at the bottom. Now I'll change this if I still need to change the font.
Yeah, I think that's a lot
Does it?
better. Just
The
see
font
that
seems okay
little
to me, except for that sharing. Gotta get out of there.
yeah, you want to get that
Okay,
out.
cool. So what I did, kind of what we were talking, Marcus, I was looking down, was I spun up a new cluster. Right, I want
And
to
where
start
where
from.
are we in the book or what
Yeah, I got that open as well. So we're sitting over here on why there's no page number at the top of there. So 478, chapter
Okay, cool.
16, the introduction to Istio. And what we're doing here when we're talking about the intro part, right? One of my things I say probably way often more than I should is I like to say if it makes it easier to use in the front end or it looks simple on the front end, it's probably complex on the back end. Somewhere in IT,
Yep.
it's complex. Whether you offload that to devs or whether you offload it to infrastructure or whatever, somewhere it has to happen. And we all know this from Kubernetes, right? Somebody can say, cool, deployment, service, ingress, my app's up. Looks like nothing to it, but we know there is a
Yep.
lot of complex moving parts in the back. So Istio is one of those, right? It just looks too simple from the front. Now, don't get me wrong. As simple as it kind of is for the features. It can get complex from that front end. You start getting into auth policies and the other features. They get
Which we will talk about tomorrow or next week.
next week. Yeah, we'll introduce them a little bit in here. But yeah, I've seen those go a lot of pages, right? You got to sit and go, okay, I got to look at this to really get through it. So we just kind of introduce what's going on here. Again, we don't usually dwell on this too much. Um, we get into the two portions, and always confusing here. You got control plane, and then you got the data plane. Basically, where you're going to install Istio. So that's the actual daemon that controls everything. We're going to overview of that a little bit. And then you got the data plane, which is going to be the proxy envoy proxies in that, right? So it is basically the envoy that you might know and use today for ingress, with some added features. So it's based on that, right? It's not a replacement. It's not the same. It's used in a special case in this. And that's kind of what goes away with the ambient mesh too,
Right.
right? And again, we'll talk about why that does matter, or why that's actually a big thing. So we get into, of course, why care about the service mesh. We covered a little bit about this, but more in depth, we write about it in here. And of course, my favorite, as dumb as it might sound, that observability,
Oh
right?
yeah.
I want to see what's going on. And I'm not, and you and I get in these discussions, right? I'm a UI person when it makes sense, which is strange coming from a guy who really, grew up on DOS and Windows. But I avoid UIs. I go into my group control commands for everything. Not here though. I mean, there just is no group control command. There are some Istio control commands to see a lot of this stuff, but man, if you use them, I'm gonna be blunt. Something's wrong with you.
It's too
Right?
much data.
That
It's
is
too much
somebody who
data
is,
and it's very
yeah,
graph oriented. And it just it it's not it's not static enough to really provide like a lot of the kube control APIs, the stuff is static, right?
yeah.
Like statuses get updated and whatnot, but other than that, it's all static data for the most part, or very slowly, relatively speaking, updated. But once you start getting into traffic and packets, I mean,
Well,
a
40
lot of
pods,
change.
not
Yeah,
counting replicas. That just might be 40 different deployments for something.
right.
Maybe you've got 160 pods. Who knows? Whatever scaling, replicas. You might have multiple namespaces, external coming in. You want to see where things. Yeah, if you can view this on a screen that fast, like the Matrix, I'm
Yeah,
impressed. I'm impressed. I wish I could. So we'll do the observability, and traffic management, right, is a big one. That was another thing you always heard people with this was doing either blue-green deployments or canary deployments. So they got V1, V2, split it 50-50, split it 20-30, 70, whatever, or heck, split it by user coming in. It's going to be, okay, cool, we're going to do a really closed kind of canary, I'll call it, where I'll put these authentication. Now, assuming you're doing this for auth, right? And you'll do parts of this, Mark, next week. But I could say I'm going to send Mark to version 3,
yeah,
right? Limit that blast radius, or heck, an enrollment. Maybe we sign up for it. Hey, I'm going to be in the
yeah.
beta. Cool. You're in beta. You're going here. So blue, green, AB. I've heard them called a million different things. This one, I got to be honest, I don't use it a ton. I do like some of it, but finding issues before they happen, right? How do you know how your app's going to react to a 500 error or timeouts? Simple delays, error codes. You want to make sure what friendly codes versus non, that we know that's going to get trapped correctly. You don't necessarily want these technical error codes going across the screens that show you exactly like, hey, you were trying to connect to this with
Yeah,
this using this. That that can have a lot of information that you simply don't want going. And to make sure that that's how it's going to work, introduce these into it in a controlled manner. Of course, security, right? MTLS, and that's only part of it. I hate this. At one time I say it was a major feature of it, and it still is. But people now want better workload. I'm going to call it almost identity. right, Mark, in this
Yeah.
case. And we've got that kind of feature. And, we joked at the beginning that integrating this with an OIDC provider, 'cause we can use those JOT tokens, something like what we use in the book, Open Unison, right? And we'll integrate parts of those next week, or
Well,
use
and
this
I think
too.
another thing to realize is when Istio came out, the concept of workload identity in Kubernetes, while it's always existed, was pretty weak.
Yeah.
Like the tokens were static. Um, they didn't they didn't rotate. They're really primarily designed just for communicating to the API server. And then, over the last couple of years, Kubernetes especially from 124, Kubernetes built-in sense of identity has really, really improved, right? Like you can
Hmm.
scope identities to specific services. You can make those identities available. You can use something like a security token service to get a little bit more out of it. So the concept of pod identity has gotten so much better in Kubernetes that the idea of using MTLS as your identity source, I think, is kind of legacy at this point,
Well,
or it's
I think I make
moving towards legacy.
I know I referenced this in one of the sections. I just forget where in this chapter, but I like how people will say, "Cool, MTLS it, we're secure." Well, no,
No,
the mesh is still
not
cluster
really.
wide, right? All that means is if I'm attacking you from another namespace, it's encrypting the
Yeah.
attack.
I mean,
Nothing's
I mean,
stopping
there's a
the
little
attack.
bit more to that because
There's
you
to
do
some,
have an identity associated with that encryption because it's mutual. Um, but
but Citadel's handing out the same thing, right? So
well,
I'm trusting it by default, the
it,
way we set things up.
it's still a fairly static approach.
Yeah.
It doesn't give you the scalability from a network perspective that tokens do, right? Because the issue you're always going to have with mutual TLS is you have to have line of sight, right?
Hmm.
You can't have a TLS termination endpoint between you and your target. And let's be real, if you've got multiple Kubernetes clusters, you might have 2 to 3 reverse proxies between the source of the traffic and the final service.
Hmm.
They're all going to be TLS termination endpoints. You're going to have a load balancer. That load balancer might have a TLS termination endpoint because you've got a wildcard certificate that you've got to use because policy dictates that you have to have that, a CA signed cert from a specific CA for all traffic that leaves your cluster. So even though from technology standpoint, yeah, you could do all this across clusters, your policy might say, no, I don't care. You've got to use, this kind of certificate.
Well, you're also getting
Um,
into a more complex setup than this that we're talking about in this chapter, right, Mark? Because we're talking one
right.
cluster, intra communication.
But that's the point, right? Like every
Yeah.
enterprise, you're going to have those more complex setups. And MTLS really, really falls down in those scenarios because what ends up
Or it gets
happening
really
is,
complex, right? Because
well,
you
it
can
gets
do
really
MPLS
complex.
at the gateway level and have your own certificates, but you got to manage those for each namespace, gateway.
Well,
It
right.
That's
But
insane.
it's insane. And then the other problem is that, when you're talking, let's say, okay, we're going to have MTLS at termination points, but then you still have to get to the last mile.
Hmm.
So if you've got, a reverse proxy between you and your service, and your termination point is that reverse proxy, and you're going to convey that identity down to the last mile, are you just going to jam it in a header that has no security on it? Like what, that last mile now becomes you've lost a lot of the benefit of that security. So MTLS is really great east west. If you're trying to do it north south, you're probably doing it wrong.
Oh yeah, 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 definitely. Sorry, I'm trying to. I was just gonna get to something on here when oh,
I mean, I'm
this
surprised they're
session.
not going to like 5 days at this point. Um, I've gotten to the point where it's like, I if somebody says I need to use a static certificate, I'm just like, no, just go away. I don't want to deal with you anymore. But I think it's at 1 year right now is the limit. Um, but yeah, it would not surprise me if they said, nope, we're going to, I mean, we could have an entire conversation about certificates and certificate security and Kafka.
Oh, we got
A
Kafka
member
now
of the
too.
gang is needed.
So
Enjoy, my friend.
I'm gonna continue on here.
Yeah, let's keep
So
going through the ladder. So we're on
I
the.
had to restart the my something's weird now. I can't even see the screen. What the heck? Hopefully everybody can see this, right?
Yeah, I
Still?
see it.
Okay,
Yep.
cool. SteamYard for some reason on my top monitor, it it's blank.
So where are we? Are we installing Istio? Is that our
Yeah, what I wanted to
where
get
we're
down
at?
to was talking about just Istio D quick, the Istio daemon. So anybody that's used Istio in the previous years, it's been a couple years now. Istio was comprised of a lot of components. It still is, but they rolled a lot of those into one Istio D. And we kind of go through all of those. It's just more of a history on what's in there. And it talks about the 4 services that were kind of put in there, Pilot, Citadel, certificates, how things are handled with the sidecar, um, all into IstioD. So we kind of break down what IstioD does, but again, everybody's read it. If you can't, go read the book. I want to start deploying it though, because you got to wait for that. It's not that it takes a long time, but we're in chapter 16 in the repo, and we've created a script like always, right? And it's actually called install Istio. Doesn't take long. So what this is going to do, again, we hard code the version of Istio because of the Kubernetes version we have, and we're going to deploy a bunch of the other tools to make Istio the observability, and those are very tight as well. So we have to kind of control this. The concepts are all the same, even in newer Istios. Just they squash bugs, add some things here and there. So we kind of run this. It downloads Istio control. Even tells you here the output when you're getting it. Hey, you know what? Ambient mode can be done. So kind of nice, saying, okay, cool, that's great. 120 is end of
I
life.
was gonna say we already got that EOL warning.
Yeah, no, it's definitely is, but runs great, right? Still great for learning. I have
Um,
been meaning to just see if I can up it with what we're using,
Kafka's
Mark.
got I think, an interesting question here. Does
I
Istio provide
can't
similar
see it.
functions as Envoy? I mean, Envoy is part of Istio, right? Like, Envoy is just a proxy. Envoy is a web server that knows how to talk to other web servers. Um, I mean, you can kind of get
Not
some
all of it
service
though. It's kind of
mesh
like Nginx
flight.
too, right? People will say get
Yeah,
Nginx and the API gateway. Um, Parts, sure, but not to this level. Not the observability either,
yeah,
right? You definitely aren't going to get that. Um, Even some of the complex auth policies, I think, Mark, I don't think you get them all. Again,
and
tough to keep up.
you would probably need to have some webhooks in there to.
True enough. Yeah,
Yeah,
I would agree. But yeah, it is part of the version of Istio that we're using. Ambient mesh gets rid of that portion, right? At least as far as the sidecar portion, I should rephrase.
right.
So we've deployed. It's pretty quick, like I said, and we do have our Istio and our ingress and egress gateway. We don't use the egress gateway for anything, but we did deploy that profile.
Yeah,
Not to get into the topic, but egress gateway is the outgoing traffic, right? Forces to go out this rather than trying to go out something else. It comes in handy because you can kind of control it. Cilium has this feature as well, right? So a lot of the CNIs do. And the reason you might want an egress gateway is you got pods communicating somewhere that might need a firewall rule. Well, pod can run on any of your 1,000 nodes. You want to
right,
put the whole 1,000 IPs into a firewall and making it Swiss cheese. So you might say 3 of these for ingress gateway, 3 IPs, right? They really do come in handy. People overanalyze what they can do. But a lot of people that do this in Cilium and they say, I'm going to do an NFS mount. Well, that's at the host level. It skips the CNI. It
right.
doesn't work like that, right? You have to understand it has to be in the CNI for that. So let's go into that book real quick. So we go into ingress gateway. That's going to be my incoming traffic, but you need more than just an ingress gateway, right? And we'll get into that object as well. So we talk about installing Istio. There's multiple options. Istio control, that's what we did. Istio operator, manifest, which you can create using Istio control. Why would you do that? Well, you might want to create manifest to go put in an Argo CD, right? Or some kind of a git sync, ACM from Anthos or from Google. And of course, Helm. It's pick your flavor. You're going to want Istio control anyways, because it does come in handy to look at neighbors, rules. Istio control is a pretty complex tool. So we go through how you can download it. Our script does this, right?
Right.
What we did between versions 2 or editions 2 and 3, Mark and I were talking way back when we were making 3, was ditching a lot of the code. Right? We wanted more room for actual tech. So you could picture how big this book would be if we kept all the code examples in.
Yep.
It's already 650 pages. So we do often say reference the script, which of course is fairly self-documenting, little headers that say it does this, it does this. We said there's profiles in Istio. That basically means, what do you want to deploy for Istio? Do you want just minimal, demo, default, preview, or ambient? So depending what you do when you deploy, you can do a manifest install or a manifest, I think it's generate, which will then create it. If you do the install one, it generates the manifest and installs it. So if we wanted an ambient mesh, we would have just said profile ambient.
Right.
And you would have saw the features in there.
And you can run both at the same time, right? You can run both the sidecar based and the ambient based at the same time in the same cluster. You don't need to have two completely separate profiles.
I have never tried.
I'm
I'm
pretty
trying to
sure that's
think how that would work, because when you go ambient, the sidecar's gone. You got one
well,
Istio
yeah,
D
but you
still.
can still have a sidecar if you want to.
There are certain options.
Because the ambient doesn't cover layer 7 traffic. It only covers layer 4.
Yeah, it's got the Z tunnel, which you're going to see in here, which
Right.
is what makes the ambient, the magic behind it. There was a podcast about 2 or 3 years ago from the creators. No idea where it is, so I shouldn't even mention it, but it was very interesting. It was about 45 minutes on Z tunnel.
Pretty sure it was the Google podcast, the Kubernetes
Could have
podcast from
been.
Google.
Yeah,
I
because I
seem
could
to
have had
remember
them on.
that podcast. That's one of my
Yeah, yeah. Just shows you how much of a geek I am when I said 45 minutes on Z tunnel's interesting. Sitting in the car at a red light, listening to that while people are blasting their music and got the ambient mesh going. So it installs, which is great. We also, if you notice in the script, I do a clear on it. We verify the install as well, right? Even on here, I'm a big fan of making sure that we verify it. And you can do that through the Istio control. As I said, Istio can do quite a bit. So one of our commands in there is to go verify it. It makes sure everything's running. And it creates a bunch of CRDs, right? We just always list these in here and say, here's what you can do. We're not going to go through all of them because chapters will get pretty big. But as we say at this point, we have Istio running. Now, one thing, we're running kind, right? And this could be the same thing even in a load balancer, depending on how many IPs you have. Our kind cluster always had Nginx running, which is listening on 80 and 443. Well, we can't have both Nginx and Istio Ingress Gateway because we have a limit of only exposing the socket once. So what we created, and the script runs this again, but it's out there, is the expose Istio. So we'll just kind of cat this. What that does is deletes the Istio Ingress namespace, ditches all of that. And then we patch the deployment for Istio Gateway. And we tell it to expose on the host ports of 40 and 80 and 443. Now this is something you don't know when you do in the real world, because you would deploy this as a load balancer service and get your IP most likely. But we had to do this to work around how the limitations of what we have for sockets. Count back over here. Okay, cool. So why Istio? We're going to do a couple things on resources, and then we're going to get into, again, my favorite, observability. Um, the authorization policies, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mark, next week, you're going to go into these even a little bit more. What we want to understand here is it's just like they sound. What are you going to allow to happen on your exposed workload? So the first thing to remember about policies, I see this a lot with people. So I'll be honest, at my job, I have a Confluence page that talks about Istio. I'm trying to explain to people, here's what you can do with it. Here's some overview. Our publisher was kind enough to let me publish the Istio chapter internally to people to say, cool, here's more about it. But I have a header at the top that says, please do not enable it unless you know what you're doing,
Yeah.
because you can break things. Yeah, it can get to this point, kind of like network policies even, right? You can just break things. You can undo it easy enough, but it causes tickets. It causes paging events to go out. Authorization policies are known to do that. And it's just because of how they work. And we'll do a couple of little examples of these. But the key to remember is this concept here of implicit enable it, meaning that once you turn them on, you better make sure you're allowing certain things or it's denied.
Right.
And that's really the headache, right? And this is where the policies
Well, there's a
get
flip
complex.
side to that headache that makes me a little annoyed at the way it's implemented is if you don't enable it, but you enable authentication and there's no authentication, you have to tell Istio to authorize based on an authentication. Otherwise, even though authentication is enabled, you'll get right through. So like that's one of
Oh,
those
yes.
tricks where it's like, okay, authentication is enabled, but it's kind of optional unless you have an authorizer that says you must be authenticated to reach the site.
We'll actually kind of talk about that a bit at the end of the chapter, Mark,
Yeah.
more about observability. I know you'll do more of it
Yeah.
in what you're going to talk about. So we're going to just quickly deploy a real quick test app, right? Nothing major. So like always, we got a little script. So it created a test app. So what this test app did is, you can see right here in the documentation, created a gateway and a virtual service. We'll talk a little bit about those. But there's always this catch
Now, I just
22.
want to do a quick time check here, Scott. We're
Yeah,
about
I see that.
12:50. Do you think we'll finish this up, or do you want to maybe do this as a two-parter?
Well, observability might become that, Mark. Yeah, because if we're going to get more into this will probably take at least another 5-10 minutes, especially this part. So let's see what we get. We'll definitely not get
Yep.
through Kiali. We could always continue Kiali and then go into the next chapter.
We good. Yeah.
Maybe say the 2 chapters is a 3-day thing rather than a 4-day, 2 and 2.
Yeah.
I think that'd be pretty good. So you can see I can curl this. That, nothing super major. What we're going to do here, though, is I've got 2 policies. That first one we're going to deal with is example 1 policy. So I'm going to make an authorization policy with no selector, so it affects the whole namespace. And you'll see my spec for this. I'm not allowing or denying anything. I'm saying I'm going to create a policy. It's just going to be a shell. So if we were to kind of deploy this now, and it already goes to test namespace. Cool. So it's created. Let's go back to the curl that I had. This should, right there. So first one worked because Mark's favorite word, eventual consistency. Obviously, I did deploy that, but it took a second to kind of go through. So the first curl worked, and then second one didn't. And you can see what it says, RBAC access denied. Well, the policy doesn't deny anything. The fact is I created it. I'm not allowing anything either. So it says, yeah, you're not getting anywhere. So be careful.
So it's an effective deny all policy because you
Yeah,
haven't authorized anything.
because we have not authorized anything. Yep. So we're going to just delete that. And that statement does get kind of complex, right? So we have a little diagram here that, and then explains it a little bit down here, where it basically will tell you if you have something, if you don't have a deny or you haven't allow, or it has nothing, denies. So, everybody with the book can just kind of read this on their own time in here. We then create the test app. We go through, and that's a deny. So now let's do a better example. Let's assume on our site we don't want people to do anything but a get, right? Let's lock down this site. We don't want people to be able to do like a post on anything. So we're going to take our example 2. And in our example 2 policy, we don't do a lot, but we do add an action for allow, right? So we've already said you have to have an allow to do something when you make a policy. And we're saying we're allowing you to get. That's it, just get. So we'll just quickly create this policy or deploy this policy. If I'm fast enough, the curl will fail again. But yep, I wasn't fast enough. So the policy's in there. So you can see get works. Now in the book, we've got this command already, but it kind of formats weird. And my IP, of course, changes. When I wrote the book, I had a 10.3 subnet. This is on my 10.2 subnet. So we're going to curl this again, but we're going to try a put command. And I'll be frank, the website itself wouldn't, I think, even accept the put because we don't have anything, but it's the
No, no,
error.
Scott. I don't want you to be Frank. I want you to be Scott.
It's true. It's true. I was just watching a ballerina on the plane. Mark, there's a scene and there was a big guy that says, "Can I be Frank?" and his name tag's Frank. I'm sorry, so say that, and I'm like, that's funny. Yes, let me be Scott then. I'm just saying, let's kind of put some data, and what I should see is RBAC access denied. All right. Now again, this site wouldn't even accept it. It's just Nginx. I don't have anything running that's going to take a put, but it doesn't matter.
Now, a question for you:
Mm-hmm.
How do these, when the policies overlap, is there a order of precedence? Is there a, like, if I have two policies that say, that line up on the same labels, but they say different things, how does
Yeah, I know where you're
Istio
going.
know how to differentiate those?
I know you're going with that. So if there's a deny, I'll have to create 2. I'm pretty sure deny overrides all the allows, Mark. I try not to create multiple policies. That's one of my problems when I get this kind of question, right? Because I want them in one, in a single
Right,
namespace. I'm not going to try to create 3 that allow this allow rule to this and 2 that deny to the same one. That just kind of gets really complex.
right.
And I'm
And
not sure what they would do. So I've only done it in one policy.
you see, I don't know that that's true, Boris, that the most restrictive would take the cake because you're doing it based on labels. And so,
That's true.
um,
Or you
you
say a
know,
whole
that,
namespace.
right. And so when you apply, typically in the Kubernetes world, when you apply things by labels, you get one. And which one is the one that gets picked is always the question.
Yeah, and that's why I say those questions are always interesting, Mark, to me, because whenever I've done it, like I said, I do one, and I've separated, or I do the labels correctly. When I say one, there could be more than one auth policy, but the labels are always a unique subset.
Yep,
To me, that just gets complex.
it really does.
Yeah, because then if you do, let's say they do take the least restrictive, most restrictive, whatever it could be, and you've got like 4 of them, you got to figure this all out.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, usually you want to have some kind of ordinality where you say, like with an access control list, you can say this is, this takes precedence and this takes precedence, but if you don't have any way to specify ordinality, I don't know that you could ever rely on. And that was a
well,
big problem with pod security policies, right? They didn't have an ordinality, and they tried to do restrictiveness you know, based on identity matching, and it never worked right.
I will come back next week to that one because I'm curious,
Yeah.
right? Saying, okay, well, I wouldn't normally do. I get this question sometimes at my day job where, hey Scott, what if I do this? I went, I don't know, I wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
So I'm not
Don't go
sure what
stick my
it'll
finger
do.
in this socket. Yeah, don't do that. I don't know
Yeah,
what will happen, but I know it's not going to be good.
and I totally understand the question, but I'm like, I can't tell you because I wouldn't do that. So let's try.
Right.
And we don't have an example for this one because it'd be a little bit more complex to try at home.
Right.
For some readers, which was we just kind of show it here of saying, hey, here's an allow that says from this IP or block. In this case, we did it to one IP, and we could do that for testing, but again, the entry level for the book. We're trying not to get too complex because
Right.
let's try to close out the rest of this. We trying to teach certain Kubernetes things. We had this problem even with reviewers, and you know this, Mark, right? They'll be reading the section, and I mentioned the word gateway. Well, you didn't tell us what a gateway was. I'm like, well,
Yeah,
I can't yet because
chicken and egg.
yeah, I'm like, if I do, that's more complex than if I just say, hey, we're doing this later.
Yep.
Um, and I mean, obviously preference and personal, but I do believe that's true. If you give everybody everything up front, there's more questions.
Too much
Yeah,
information. Yeah.
yeah, and taking it off in bite-sized pieces and seeing it. So we had that test app. Um, let me get into this again. So yeah, let's just do it that way. I'm gonna get the pods in test app. So you can see we've got the Nginx ingress, but we've also then, to expose this, we use a gateway and we have a virtual service. Now, Envoys that comes with Istio does support normal ingress object too, right? But we talked about that with Nginx. It doesn't change a lot. Annotations do, but that's a different story. So a gateway you're going to create, you might have multiple gateways in your
You might have no
namespace.
gateways.
You might have no gateways.
If you're not doing any ingress into the cluster and everything is east-west, you
That is
don't.
absolutely, absolutely.
You
That's
know,
a good
I've
point.
I've got a customer that uses Open Unison, and they use it with the Kong
Oh yeah.
ingress gateway,
Yep.
which has issues with re-encryption. So
Oh,
it's plain text uh, from the gateway, the ingress gateway down to, which is just an envoy proxy, down to the pod. And we were talking about it. I was like, yeah, I don't care because I use the service mesh to. I think they're using Linkerd. I use the service mesh to do encryption, so no big
yeah, no,
deal.
it's a good point. Very good point. I mean, I don't see it a lot, but you're right. You're absolutely right. Well, I shouldn't say I don't see it a lot. Somebody does have one gateway, but it doesn't mean they
Right.
have it for all of the different deployments, right? But often they will expose it. And so what our gateway does here, and we detail all this in the reading, but you got to tell your gateway what ingress gateway you're going to use, which honestly, there can be a big discussion on this, but this is what we do in a multi-tenant cluster typically. You're going to use the ingress gateway that we have deployed in Istio system, right? Your gateway is going to piggyback on that. And you basically, almost like an ingress rule in a way, you're saying, here's my URL, so probably a wildcard. Of course, we're using NIP.io in this case, and your ports. Now in the book, this is an important thing to kind of cover. We have an example here, and we're saying sales gateway, sales, blah, blah, typical stuff. But we add this at the bottom. Okay, now the TLS. This goes into what Mark was saying earlier about TLS termination as well. Typically, what I see in multi-tenant type spaces is you don't add this because you're going to piggyback on the wildcard certificate that's on the Istio ingress gateway in the Istio system namespace. However, if you have unique URLs that aren't part of that, you might need certificates. There's a downfall to this, though. The certificates, and you can see we're mapping these, obviously, so there'd be a secret somewhere. We do some other things. But in order to use certificates in Istio, have to be in the Istio system. It can get very complex to try to use them because you're not going to give your developer who has a namespace sales access to Istio system to create and delete secrets because they could delete your Istio ingress secret.
Right.
And they can view everybody else's secret. That means they've got their private keys. You just took MTLS and threw it out the window.
Yep.
What I did internally is I've written a custom controller that does this in Python. So you create it in your namespace, looks for an annotation. It creates the same one in Istio system using your namespace in part of the name. Now, API Gateway does work with Istio. If you use Istio integrated with API Gateway, this is not a problem because it can read the secret and the TLS in your namespace. It doesn't
That
go to
makes
the Istio
sense.
system. Yeah, it's kind of cool. So I know it's a lot to say. I often hear myself say a topic and go, man, that's confusing to me. And I wrote it because It is a downfall of Istio. I don't know why it does that. Nginx doesn't do that. It can read it from your namespace. It has for years, but this one can't.
Yeah, but Nginx, I love Ingress Nginx, but um, they give you no control from an RBAC perspective to be able to limit which secrets they have access to. So what you've actually done is you've exposed all your secrets to your ingress into the cluster across the
Mm.
entire cluster. Um,
Yeah,
so that
yeah.
so it, there have been a few different open tickets. I know I opened one to say, hey, can we maybe limit this to one namespace, or say, you know what, I'm just going to use a wild card for stuff. So there are definite downfalls to using the Nginx approach. It's easier, but you better make damn sure you keep that Nginx updated, because if there's a breach and somebody gets a hold of that service account, all your service, all
Definitely
your
issues.
secrets are belong to us.
And I would say they're not a replacement for it, right, Mark? More of an example of, there's something that lets you do it,
Yeah.
doesn't. So, I'm sure there's other reasons. So on top of that, the gateway, we have our virtual service, right? So your incoming traffic is going to go Istio Ingress Gateway, going to get your gateway, and your virtual service tells your gateway how to route that traffic. Now, this is a pretty simple example of one, but we can do other things like a destination rule, and we kind of talked about this as well. So you got your virtual services coming here, but now we're going to say, let's take version 1 and version 2 and make them go different. So you're going to come into that URL, but you might have half the people hit version 1, half hit version 2. Like in this example, that's exactly what it would be, because we're going to do a round robin. So people come in, 1, 2. Now, of course, if version 2 of the app goes down, 50% of your calls are, hey, I'm getting can't find. It does actually help to figure out which one it is, right? Because you'll know if it's half of them. And you've got other options you can do aside from round robin. This is part of our traffic control, which is very popular, right? It is one of the reasons that a lot of people deploy Istio, is for the rule sets like that. The peer authentication sets up our MTLS, so our mutual TLS between pods. You can set it strict or permissive, right? One requires, one allows both. Again, conversation on people is, I want strict all the time. That can be bad. I have reservations of cluster level forcing a lot, because when you do that, you can't go to the namespace level to do something.
Right.
So I often will do something like here, and I'm going to say, yeah, cluster, I'm not going to enforce strict, right? It's part of the standard. You have to enable it. But you got that weird use case and you get some kind of a sign off from management that says you can do it. I want to be able to let you do it.
Right.
So yeah, people go back and forth on this. I'd say this is a matter of your own standards, right? And DMZ, different story. You might say strict. There are certain scenarios where it's like, yeah, you don't want to. And this one, that next week when we do observability, right after I'm done with that, Mark will get into these a little bit more. And this is the
Yep.
token stuff, right, Mark? And this is where I think you were talking earlier with the whole, hey, you present something, but yet your access is granted. Right?
Right.
This example here, you didn't give me a token, but it lets you in.
Exactly.
Why did that happen? Well, you didn't set it up right. And this is an interesting one. And we'll kind of leave it for the demo Mark has, but we kind of introduce it in this chapter, because this can really come back and bite you for a lot of different reasons, right? Not just because the behavior is unexpected, but this one is a huge security issue.
Oh yeah. You can think that you've set up authentication. You have. And if you give it a bad token, it'll fail. You give it a good token, it'll pass. You give it no token, it'll pass.
And that's the freaky thing, because
Oops.
well, a lot of us might try invalid token,
Yeah.
but how many try no token? Maybe they do,
I,
right? But
I will tell you that LDAP has a similar quirk, where if you try to authenticate with no password or an empty password, it will go through as an anonymous bind. So if you don't validate that there is a password when you go to do your bind operation to validate the password, um, it'll succeed, and you'll think you validated the account, and it turns out no, LDAP is running under this weird quirk of the protocol. And you know, if there's no validation, you've now let somebody authenticate by not putting in a password.
That's where these things, Mark, I love this. I'll get these from people that'll ask for support questions, whether it might be an SRE, devs, outside, whatever, right? But and they'll say, "How did you know that?" I'm like, "I've run into it."
I've been
Um,
burned. I have the
Playing with these
scars.
things helps a lot, right?
Yep.
I say lots of time and headaches, and you learn. When everything works for you, that's horrible
Yeah.
from an engineering standpoint because you don't get to learn a lot. I want to close out this part of the talking before we get into observability to end it at a good point. One thing to keep in mind about a mesh, when you label your namespace for the mesh, which we really didn't mention in here, by the way, but you can tell your namespace use Istio. That's what tells it to invoke the sidecars. Um, you, your cluster as a whole mesh. So by default, you got a couple things to think about. Your workload is now in the mesh. It assumes everything's in the mesh. You know, that might be okay. Everything is intra-cluster. If that pod that you're running that has a sidecar injected into it has to now communicate with, let's just say, Oracle database on the outside world, the mesh is going to assume that traffic stays local. So it won't work. Very common when we first enabled this many years ago was people getting me all the time. I can't connect, can't connect. I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. Got two ways to deal with this. You can do a service entry. That's okay. Not a huge fan of it. Not gonna say it's bad, but I'm a bigger fan of the next one. But if you did have something you wanted to connect to, like Oracle, you would create this entry. Now, there's a reason I don't like just service entries. The sidecar grows in RAM usage based on how many objects are in the mesh. If you're in a multi-tenant cluster and everybody else is adding service mesh entries, your sidecar grows. So you might tweak the heck out of the sidecar for resources, and then you run out of memory out of the blue. You call me, you say, Scott, I don't know what's going on. It used to work. Yeah, well, the service mesh is growing. Do you need to talk to the rest of the mesh? Probably not. Now, even if you have network policies in place that don't let that happen, it doesn't matter. The mesh
Right.
is still maintained. So the one I like, sidecar object. Very confusing object. Because you tell somebody sidecar object, they think the Envoy sidecar. It does interact with that, but that doesn't replace it, and it actually has nothing to do with it in general. But what I do with the sidecar object, and I recommend this to everybody that uses a cluster of mine, is create this object before you start anything. In here, you tell it what namespaces are part of the mesh that you care about. Call it almost like a mini mesh. So most common, you got to know what Istio system.
Right.
And then this is current namespace. I'm just trying to make it easy to people. You can fill in your own namespace, but I just say, yep, wherever you deployed. Now your sidecar will only look for things and interact with things through a mesh that are your namespace and Istio system. Another example we show here is you might have sales 2 and 3. So out of this cluster-wide mesh, you want your current namespace, sales 2 and sales 3, to be in the same mesh, sub-mesh, I'm going to call it again. You can just put these in here, right? It's not a security measure as per se, but it helps you limit your sidecar. It also means if I want to talk to that Oracle box, it'll work
Right.
because that destination is not in the mesh. And this really stops out of memory problems because, again, the sidecar grows. And we don't really want to get into these too much. Envoy filters and WASM. WASM's a replacement for Envoy. I'm going to call it a replacement. It's augmenting right now. But you might make something like, I'm going to say maybe,
Authorization
and
filter?
you could. I'm thinking
We do
more
that next
of,
chapter.
yeah, I mean, the most common filters that I've seen, honestly, deals with limiting bandwidth and such. But problem is, Envoy filters can break the whole mesh if
Right.
incorrect, and it can really stop upgrades from succeeding. WASM is the replacement for this. So the web application assembly. Remember, I think it was KubeCon Detroit, Mark? It was a huge thing. Everybody talked WASM.
Huge thing about
It was,
WASM.
it was just,
That was the thing.
it was the buzz term for the,
Yeah, that was the
that
buzz term
conference.
for
But
for
they're a lot easier
2023.
to write. and they don't break the cluster. There are some examples out there. There are also some Envoy filter ones out there as well. Not that you can't write them, just be careful. I'd never delegate the authority to let everybody write them because that could break it.
Right.
So, and then you can see where I'm trying to cut this off is at the observability. When we get into observability, we're going to do some Prometheus, Grafana, Jaeger, and Kiali. So we'll get into traces, some of the Grafana dashboards that are already included. Really won't do a lot with Prometheus. We have to have it. Mark already went through Prometheus before. And Kiali, the one thing that, again, I'm a big fan of. What I'll do at that point is share out, stop the screen.
So that'll bring us to Kiali for next week.
To start.
And then we'll probably go straight. Why don't we make next week all about Kiali?
We can try. That's a long time, though, Mark, to do just Kiali.
Well, I think because we'll want to spend some time because it's the pet store that gets deployed, right? Or the
boutique store.
Boutique store. The store. I think there's a lot there, and then covering adding security to Kiali, is a big one.
Yeah, because we don't do that in this chapter. We do that.
This chapter we don't do that. No, in the next chapter we start off with saying, "Hey, we got all this cool observability. How do we secure this and give it, secure access?"
So. Yeah, you're right. Then that would be that's easily 15, 20 minutes in there.
Yeah,
there'll be some questions too on some of the Kiali stuff. Not to say I know. The thing about Kiali is they update a lot.
Right.
You get to know it, and then next thing you know, go in and go, "What the heck is that part?" Which is good.
Yeah. Hold on. When did we actually do? Looking through here, because I'm diving right into.
We can look at that.
Okay, that's right. We start off the conversation next week with monoliths or next chapter with monoliths versus microservices, and we use Open Unison as an example as a monolith. So I think that still works. Why don't we plan on we'll bridge the two chapters?
Yeah, and then we could always do yours in a little bit of out of order, right? Go to the Kiali.
Yeah.
And then come on back.
We'll figure out how that works, and then we'll wrap up the two chapters with a third live stream to cover the API, the API stuff. So
Makes
cool.
sense.
Well, everybody, thank you so much for joining us as always. And if you have bought the book and not left a review on Amazon, please. Big difference, huge difference.
Or tell a friend about it.
Or tell a friend. So, thank you very much, everybody. Have a great rest of your week. And we'll see you next week.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it as always.